Why would an 82-year-old woman be called a burden in the very motel she had kept alive with her own tired hands? Mabel Whitaker heard the word through the office wall before anyone said it to her face. Burden. It came in her grandson's careful voice, the voice he used when he wanted something cruel to sound practical. He stood by the front counter with a folder of sale papers under one arm, while the old vacancy sign blinked red behind him. She cannot manage this place anymore, Caleb said. She is a burden on the property, on the family, on everything. Mabel sat in the small office behind the counter, with her purse on her knees and her German shepherd's head resting against her slipper. Duke was 9 years old, broad through the shoulders, gray along the muzzle, and so loyal that people sometimes mistook his silence for obedience. His ears moved with every word from the lobby. Mabel did not cry. She pressed her thumb against the brass motel key in her pocket. Room 7. Her husband had handed it to her the first winter they owned the Blue Lanterns, when the pipes froze and she stayed up until dawn with coffee, towels, and a ledger no one else wanted to touch. The Blue Lantern had 12 rooms, one rattling ice machine, a gravel lot, and a wooden key rack behind the front desk. Mabel knew which room heater clicked before it warmed, and when a guest needed a discount more than a lecture. But to Caleb, the motel was land beside a road that had become more valuable than the rooms. A developer wanted the lot. Caleb wanted the deal. And Mabel, who still lived behind the office, stood in the way. "Grandma," he said, with that gentle tone people use when they have already made a decision for someone else. "We need to talk." Mabel looked up. Her white hair was pinned in a careful twist. She wore a blue cardigan with a mended cuff and a name tag she no longer had to wear but still did. "Mabel?" Tired guests seemed less frightened when they knew what to call. The woman giving them a key. Duke lifted his head. Caleb placed the folder on the desk. "The buyer is ready. The offer is fair. You cannot keep living here alone, and we cannot keep paying for repairs." "You do not pay for repairs," Mabel said quietly. Caleb's face tightened. "That is not the point. It is part of the point." He took a breath. "The point is that this place is falling apart. The rooms are half empty. The roof needs work. You need help with the laundry, with the bills, with Duke. It is too much." Mabel's hand moved from the key in her pocket to Duke's collar. "Duke has food. I have food. The water heater was fixed last month. I paid for that." "With what, Grandma? Little envelopes of cash? Old receipts in shoeboxes?" "That is exactly what I mean. You cannot keep track of things the old way." She looked at the folder, but did not touch it. "Your grandfather kept track that way. So did I." Caleb leaned closer. "Grandpa is gone." The room became very still. Duke stood not quickly, not loudly, but with enough weight that Caleb noticed. The dog did not growl. He moved until his shoulder pressed against Mabel's knee, and his body faced Caleb, a quiet line drawn on the old carpet. "I am asking you to let us help," Caleb said. "No," Mabel answered. "You are asking me to sign away the motel before I read what is in that folder. It is a standard sale packet. Then it can wait until tomorrow. The offer will not wait forever. Neither did your grandfather when he needed clean rooms, and no one else would take the night shift." Caleb looked toward the peeling photograph of the motel from 1978, the year the sign was new, and the flower bed still had marigolds. He did not look at it long. "You are making this emotional," he said. "It is emotional. It is property." Mabel looked at him then, really looked at him. Property is what people call a place after they forget who worked inside it. For a moment, Caleb had no answer. Somewhere down the hall, the ice machine kicked and rattled. Caleb gathered the papers back into the folder. "We will come back this afternoon. Please think about assisted living. Please think about how hard you are making this." He left before she could answer. Mabel stayed seated until the lobby door closed. Duke licked the back of her hand once, a small, practical comfort, as if he knew she would not want pity. She stood with one hand on the desk and walked slowly to the lobby. The motel smelled like coffee, floor wax, and rain. The key rack hung behind the counter, 12 brass hooks in 2 rows. Each key had a plastic tag with a number and a little blue lantern stamped in white. Mabel straightened, room 4, then room 9, then room 7. Duke did not follow her usual path to the front window. He walked past the counter, past the soda machine, and stopped at the narrow door leading to the laundry room. Mabel frowned. "Not now, boy. I need to check the register." Duke did not move. The laundry room door stood half open. Beyond it, the dryers were silent. On the far wall, above detergent and lost socks, hung the old overflow key rack. It was rough pine, darker from age, with hooks for spare keys, maintenance keys, boiler keys, and keys nobody had used in years. Duke stared at it. Mabel took one step closer. Her knee ached when the weather changed. "What is it?" The dog's ears pushed forward. He sniffed the air, then the floor near the dryer vent, then lifted his nose toward the old rack again. Not excited, not confused, focused. Mabel followed his gaze. One hook was empty. At first, that meant nothing. Keys went missing in motels. But the empty hook had a pale outline around it, a clean shape in the dust, as if something that had hung there for years had been removed only recently. Mabel reached for the shelf to steady herself. Duke gave one low sound from his chest. Not a bark, but a warning to look harder. The label beneath the empty hook was written in her own hand, faded but still readable. Old register room. She had not thought of that label in years. The old register room had once been a narrow space behind the laundry, used for reservation cards, guest books, tax envelopes, and the kind of history no one wants until someone tries to erase it. Caleb's father had walled most of it off. Mabel remembered saying, not to throw away the old records. Her husband had answered, "I will keep the important ones, May." May, no one had called her that since he died. The sale papers were on the counter. The buyer was waiting, and Caleb had called her a burden. But Duke was looking at the missing key to a room. The family had pretended no longer existed. What could a missing key prove, when everyone had already decided? Mabel was too old to remember what mattered. Mabel stood in the laundry room, with one hand on the metal shelf, and Duke planted beside her. The dryer doors reflected both of them in dull circles. An old woman in a blue cardigan, and a German shepherd watching a wall of forgotten keys as if it were a door into the past. The label under the empty hook still read Old Register Room. She touched the dusty wood beneath it. The dust came away on her fingertip, except for the pale, clean shape where a key had hung for years. Someone had taken it recently. Duke pressed his nose to the baseboard under the rack and breathed in short, sharp sniffs. Then he moved to the narrow panel behind the detergent shelf, the place where the laundry room wall never quite matched the rest. Mabel remembered that seam. Her husband, Walter, had covered the old records door with thin paneling after the motel office was remodeled. He had not locked it forever. He had only hidden it from guests, from damp air, from people who thought old paper was clutter, from people like Caleb. Mabel reached for the shelf and pulled one plastic jug of detergent aside. It was too heavy. Duke stepped forward and nudged the jug with his shoulder. Not enough to spill it, just enough to slide it toward the floor. Mabel gave a tired laugh that sounded almost like a cough. "You always were better help than most people," she whispered. Behind the jug, the edge of the panel showed a small brass keyhole, dark with dust. No key waited in it. Mabel closed her eyes. For a moment, she was not 82. She was 51. Standing in that same laundry room after midnight, while Walter counted crumpled bills, and she folded towels warm from the dryer. There had been a winter when the interstate was closed for 3 days, and every room filled with stranded families. Mabel had made soup in a dented pot and washed sheets until her fingers cracked. Walter had told every guest, My wife is the reason this place still has lights. But years had a way of bleaching a sentence until only the building remained, and the woman inside it became an expense. A car door slammed outside. Duke turned his head through the laundry room window. Mabel saw Caleb's black pickup beside the office, and behind it, her daughter-in-law, Marcy's Suv. Marcy was not unkind in the loud way. She smiled while removing things from a room. She called it organizing. Mabel put the detergent jug back in front of the panel, just as Caleb opened the lobby door. Grandma? Duke moved first. He walked out of the laundry room and stopped in the hallway, blocking the narrow passage between the lobby and the back rooms. His tail stayed low. His paws were wide. He did not bark, but he made his size difficult to ignore. Caleb appeared with Marcy behind him. Marcy carried a canvas tote and a roll of trash bags. "Oh, good," Marcy said. "You are up. I thought we could start with the laundry shelves. It will help you see how much you do not need." Mabel looked at the trash bags. "This is still my home," Marcy's smile held. "Of course, we are only helping. You brought bags. For broken things. Old things. Expired things." Caleb glanced at Duke. "Can you move him? He is standing where he chooses. He cannot block people in a business. He is not blocking guests." Marcy stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Mabel, this is what Caleb means. You are attached to every object, every old towel, every old key, every useless box. It is not safe." The word safe landed harder than burden. Safe was the word people used when they wanted permission to take control without sounding greedy. "I know what is on those shelves," Mabel said. "Do you?" Marcy asked gently. "Because Caleb said, there may be old guest records back there. Those need to be destroyed properly. You cannot just keep private information lying around." Mabel felt Duke's flank brush her leg. Private information. That was too specific for a room. Caleb claimed did not matter. "What records?" Mabel asked. Caleb answered too quickly. "Old motel stuff. Nothing important then. Why did you take the key?" His eyes changed. Only for a second, but enough. Marcy looked at him, then at the old key rack. "I did not take anything," Caleb said. Mabel waited. He sighed. "I found a key in the office last week. I did not know what it opened, so I put it somewhere safe. Where with the sale documents?" Mabel's hand tightened around the shelf. "That key belongs to this motel. This motel belongs to the family, and I am what?" Caleb did not answer. Marcy touched his arm. "Mabel, no one is trying to erase you," she said. Duke gave a low growl then. Not at the words, but at Marcy's tote as she reached toward the shelf behind Mabel. The canvas bag shifted, and Mabel saw the corner of a blue plastic tag inside it. A motel key tag. The little white lantern was worn almost smooth. Marcy froze. Mabel's voice came out thin but steady. "Open the bag." "Mabel, please. Open it." Caleb's face flushed. "Marcy, show her." Marcy set the tote on the dryer and pulled out a bundle wrapped in a cleaning rag. Inside was the missing key. Its brass teeth were dark. The tag said Old Register Room in Walter S. block handwriting on one side, and on the other, in smaller letters, May knows. The laundry room seemed to shrink around those two words. May knows. Mabel touched the tag, but Caleb did not give it to her. He kept it between his fingers. "I was going to check what was in there before anything got misplaced," he said. "Before what got found?" Mabel asked. His mouth tightened again. Marcy picked up the trash bags from the floor. "This is getting upsetting. Maybe we should take Duke's outside?" Duke stepped backward until his body pressed against the hidden panels, as if the wall itself had asked him for protection. Mabel saw the old dog's gray muzzle, the missing key in Caleb's hand, and the words Walter had left for her in faded ink. Caleb could call her a burden. Marcy could call the records clutter. But Duke had not led her to trash. He had led her to the one door someone had already tried to open without her. Caleb finally placed the key on the dryer, but he did not step away from it. Mabel reached for it slowly. Her fingers closed around the brass, warm from his hand, and Duke's growl faded into silence. The panel had not opened, yet the hidden room had not given up a single page. But the first proof was already in Mabel's palms. Someone else had remembered the room well enough to steal the key, and Walter had trusted only May to know why. If Walter had written May knows on the back of a motel key, what had he hidden in a room the family now wanted opened without her? Mabel waited until Caleb and Marcy stepped back before she turned the keys. Her hand was not steady, but it was her hand. Duke stood beside her with his nose close to the seam in the panel, breathing in the smell of old wood, dryer lint, and whatever waited behind a wall that had been pretending for years. The lock resisted at first. Mabel felt Caleb watching the tremor in her wrist, probably adding it to the list of reasons she should not be trusted with keys, rooms, or choices. She changed her grip, pressed the brass teeth deeper, and turned again. This time, the lock clicked. The narrow panel opened only 3 inches before it scraped against the floor. Dust rolled out in a gray breath. Duke sneezed once, then pushed his muzzle toward the gap. He did not force his way in. He looked back at Mabel as if asking permission. "Easy," she whispered. Caleb pulled his phone from his pocket. "I should record what is inside for the sale inventory." "No," Mabel said. "It is motel property. It is my home. It is a business asset. It is a room your grandfather marked for me." Marcy lifted both hands. "No one is touching anything. We just need to know if there are records that should not be kept." Mabel looked at her. "Then, you will stand there and let me open it." The panel groaned when Duke nudged the bottom with his shoulder. Mabel held the edge and pulled. Behind it was not a room a person could stand in anymore, but a narrow storage space lined with shelves. Old reservation cards sat in paper bundles. Metal cash boxes were stacked under a tarp. A cracked fan and 2 framed certificates leaned against the wall. And at the back, wrapped in a blue laundry blanket, was a guest book with a black cover. Mabel saw it and forgot to breathe. The Blue Lantern had used guest books before printed slips and computer forms. Walter loved them because people wrote more than names. Truckers wrote jokes. Families wrote where they were headed. Newlyweds wrote thank you notes in rounds. Careful letters. Mabel used to read them after midnight, when the office was quiet and the neon sign hummed outside the glass. Caleb leaned past her shoulder. "That is all? Old books?" Duke's ears flattened. Mabel reached for the black book, but it sat too high and too far back. Her shoulder would not lift that way anymore. She looked around for the wooden step stool Walter had made. It was gone. "I can get it," Caleb said. "No, Grandma." "No," she repeated, and this time the word had more breath in it. "Duke." The dog stepped forward at the sound of his name. Mabel pointed to the blue blanket hanging from the shelf. Duke gripped the corner gently in his teeth and pulled backward. The bundle shifted. Dust shook loose. Caleb made a sound of impatience, but Duke kept pulling until the guest book slid forward and dropped onto the lower shelf with a heavy thump. Mabel caught it before it could fall to the floor. The cover was cracked. The corners were soft from hands. A strip of tape crossed the spines, and in Walter's handwriting were the words Nightbook. Marcy frowned. Why would he hide a guest book? Mabel did not answer because she knew the nicknames. The Nightbook was not the official register. The official register held names, room numbers, payment methods, taxes. The Nightbook held the things people told a woman behind a motel counter when they had nowhere else to say them. Mabel carried it to the folding table near the dryers. Duke walked so close his shoulder brushed her skirt. Caleb hovered on her other side too near. "Back up," Mabel said. "I just want to see. You will see when I see." She opened the cover. The first page smelled faintly of paper, mildew, and the old coffee Walter used to spill on everything. Names filled the columns in different hands. Dates, room numbers. Notes in the margins: need extra blanket, paid cash, car trouble, baby fever, let them call home. Mabel ran one finger down the page. These are not useless. No one said useless. Caleb said. Marcy said nothing. Mabel turned more pages. There were years inside the book. Winters of frozen roads. Summers of church vans. Storm nights when the motel filled before supper. Mabel saw her own handwriting again and again, small and firm. Gave room 6 to the Miller family. No charge until Friday. Called mechanic for man in room 2. Kept envelope behind desk for Mrs. Alvarez. Duke's nose lowered to the open page. He sniffed once, then nudged the lower corner with surprising care. Mabel turned that page. A yellow envelope had been taped between 2 sheets. The tape had dried brown and curled at the edges. On the front, in Walter's hand, were 4 words for May when needed. Mabel's throat tightened so sharply she had to sit. Caleb reached first. Duke moved faster. The German shepherd placed one paw on the edge of the folding table and gave a single deep bark that filled the laundry room. Caleb snatched his hand back. "Control your dog," he snapped. "He is controlled," Mabel said. "He is watching the hand that moved before I did." Marcy stared at the envelope. "Maybe we should all calm down." Mabel did not look away from Caleb. "Maybe you should ask why your hand reached for a letter with my name on it." No one answered. She peeled the old tape carefully. It flaked under her nail. Duke lowered his paw, but stayed close enough that his breath moved the page. Inside the envelope was not money. It was not a deed. It was a folded sheet of motel stationery and a small black and white photograph. Mabel unfolded the paper. Walter's handwriting leaned across the page, familiar as the sound of his keys hitting the counter. "May, if they ever make you feel like you were only living here, open the nightbook. Every year this place survived, your hands were on it." Mabel stopped reading. Not because the words ended. Because Caleb whispered, "That does not prove anything." And that was when the photograph slipped from the fold and landed face up on the table. It showed Mabel standing behind the Blue Lantern counter, 30 years earlier, younger, thinner, with tired eyes and both hands on the guest book. Beside her stood Walter, one hand on her shoulder. Behind them, mounted on the wall, was the same wooden key rack. But in the photograph, a small brass plaque hung above it, clear enough to read. Mabel Whitaker, night manager and co-keeper. Mabel stared at the words. Duke lowered his head beside the photo, as if he had found not a treasure, but a name that had been waiting to be spoken again. If the photograph showed Mabel's name above the key rack, why had everyone in the family learned to speak, as if that name had never belonged there? Caleb stared at the small black and white picture without touching it. The laundry room had gone quiet, except for the faint tick of the dryer cooling behind them. Mabel sat at the folding table, with Walter S. letter in one hand and the photograph in the other. Duke's chin rested near the edge of the table, close enough to the picture that his whiskers almost brushed the paper. Marcy was the first to speak. "A plaque in a photograph does not mean ownership." Mabel looked up slowly. "I did not say ownership." Caleb seized on that exactly. "This does not change the sale. It is sentimental, and I understand that. But it is still sentimental." The word sentimental sounded almost kind, which made it sharper. It meant the photo could be put in a box. It meant the nightbook could be praised and ignored. It meant Mabel could be thanked for all she had done, then moved out before supper. She placed the photograph flat on the table. "Your grandfather wrote that every year this place survived. My hands were on it and I am grateful," Caleb said too quickly. "Grateful people do not call you a burden while holding sale papers." His face hardened. "Grandma, we have to be realistic." Duke lifted his head at the change in Caleb's voice. Mabel knew that word too. Realistic. Another polite word people used when they wanted an old woman to stop remembering. She turned the letter over. There was writing on the back, a shorter note in Walter S. careful block letters. "Ask Ruth about the winter ledger. She remembers the ice storm." Mabel read it twice. Ruth Bell had worked the front desk on weekends when Mabel's children were small. She had curly red hair, then a laugh like a screen door, and a memory for guests that rivaled Mabel's own. Ruth had moved away years ago, but last Christmas, she had sent a card with a return address from a senior apartment building 2 towns over. Caleb saw the name. Who is Ruth? Someone who was here. Most people who were here are gone. Not all. Marcy folded her arms. Mabel, even if this woman remembers something, memories are not records. Mabel looked down at the notebook. Then we will find records. Caleb exhaled through his nose. This is exactly the problem. One old photo, one old letter, and now you want to chase people who may not even remember you. The buyer will not wait while we dig through ancient motel gossip. Duke stepped away from the table. At first, Mabel thought he was reacting to Caleb again. But the dog was not watching Caleb. He was watching the open storage space behind the panels. His ears had moved forward, and his nose worked in a slow, searching pattern. He walked past the detergent shelf, put one paw inside the low opening, and sniffed the floorboards. Duke, Mabel said softly. The dog lowered himself and pushed his head deeper into the space. Caleb reached for his phone. I am calling someone to come clear this out properly. No, Mabel said. You cannot crawl in there. I am not going to. Duke backed out with dust on his muzzle, and a strip of blue cloth caught between his teeth. It was a torn piece of the laundry blanket that had wrapped the notebook. Something small was tied into the cloth, heavy enough to make it swing. Mabel held out her hand. Duke dropped it into her palm. Inside the cloth was a brass tag. Not a room key tag, but a flat oval engraved with 2 words. Night safe. Mabel frowned. The night safe had been the old metal cash box Walter kept under the counter before the bank installed a drop slot. It had disappeared after the remodel, or she had thought it had. Caleb's expression changed again. This time not toward anger, but calculation. Mabel, Marcy said carefully. Maybe let Caleb check that. If it is a safe key, there could be cash. It is not a key, Mabel said. It is a tag. Caleb stepped closer. Then where is the safe? Mabel closed her fingers around the tag. Why do you want to know so badly? He stopped. For the first time that day. Caleb looked less like a grandson, trying to solve a problem, and more like a man trying to reach a door before someone else did. Mabel turned back to the notebook. Duke sat beside her, still staring at the storage space. The dog had not pulled out the brass tag by accident. He had smelled the cloth, or the metal, or some old human scent trapped under years of dust. To everyone else, the storage space was clutter. To Duke, it was a map written in things people left behind. Mabel searched the pages around Walter's letter. Near the margin, beside a date from a January ice storm, someone had written in blue ink, Night safe moved below rack after pipe leaks. Below rack. Mabel looked toward the wooden key rack in the laundry room. Not the hidden panel. The rack itself. The rough pine board with its 12 old hooks and labels that had faded into the grain. Duke stood before she did. He crossed to the rack and placed one paw against the lower edge. The board shifted, just a little. Enough to send a line of dust falling down the wall, Marcy whispered Caleb. Caleb moved toward the rack. Duke turned his head and gave one low warning sound. Get him away from there, Caleb said. Mabel rose slowly, one hand on the table. Her knees complained, and her back pulled, but she stood. No, that rack is attached to the wall. Then it can wait for someone who will remove it without breaking it. Mabel, this is ridiculous. No, she said. And now her voice filled the laundry room in a way Caleb had not heard from her in years. Ridiculous is calling a woman a burden in the place where her name used to hang. The silence after that was not apology. Not yet. But it was the first silence that belonged to her. Mabel took the photograph, the letter, and the brass tag, and slipped them into the notebook. Duke stayed by the key rack, his body angled toward the lower board. The guest book had not settled the sale. The photograph had not proved everything. But Walter's note had pointed to Ruth. The notebook had pointed to the winter ledger. and Duke had just found a brass tag that made Caleb want the wall open before anyone else arrived. Why would Caleb be so eager to open a wall if the brass tag meant nothing but an old motel safe? Mabel did not let anyone touch the key rack until Ruth Bell answered the phone. The first call rang until it became a thin mechanical voice. The second went to the same place. On the third, a woman answered with a breathless hello, as if she had crossed a room too quickly. Ruth? Mabel asked. There was a pause, and then the voice softened. May Whitaker? Mabel closed her eyes. No one in the laundry room moved. Caleb stood with his arms crossed. Marcy kept looking between the nightbook and the old rack, as if one of them might accuse her. Duke lay on the floor beside Mabel's chair, but his eyes stayed open, fixed on Caleb's shoes. It is Mabel now, she said, mostly. Not to me, Ruth said. You will always be May from the Blue Lantern. Are you all right? Mabel looked at the sale folder on the counter through the open laundry door. I do not know yet. She explained only what mattered: the missing key, the hidden panel, Walter's letter, Ruth's name written on the back, the winter ledger. Ruth was silent for so long. Mabel thought the call had failed. Then Ruth said, he kept it. Caleb leaned forward. Kept what? Mabel put the phone on speaker and set it on the folding table. Ruth's voice came out thin, old, but very clear. Walter kept a second ledger after the ice storm. The official one never showed what really happened that week, because half the people could not pay when they checked in. May wrote down who owed what, who had children, who needed medicine, who could pay later. She made Walter promise not to send those families away. Marcy's expression changed a little. Not enough to be remorse, but enough to be uncertainty. Caleb said, that was kind. But it does not affect the motel now. Ruth gave a short laugh. Young man, that week is the reason half the town used the Blue Lantern for 20 years. Your grandfather wanted to close rooms to save on heat. May opened everyone. Mabel looked down at Duke. His tail moved once against the floor. Ruth continued. There was a safe under the lower key rack after the pipe leak. Not a wall safe, exactly. A small night safe. Walter kept the winter ledger in it with cash envelopes, signed slips, and one photograph of the plaque. He told me if anyone ever tried to say May was just helping out, the book would remind them she was the one who kept the lights on. Caleb shook his head. This is a memory. It is not verification. No, Ruth said. It is a witness. Verification is the ledger. And if Walter hid it where I think he did, May should be the one to open it. The old woman on the phone did not raise her voice. She did not have to. Her certainty changed the room more than anger could have. Mabel thanked her, wrote down her address, and promised to call back after they found the safe. Ruth made her promise something else too. Do not let them throw away the nightbook, Ruth said. Some of us left our names in that place, because you were the only one who treated us like names. When the call ended, Caleb rubbed his forehead. Even if there is a safe, we need a contractor. We cannot just tear apart walls. No one is tearing, Mabel said. She looked at the rack. The lower edge had shifted when Duke touched it. Walter had built things in a simple way. Hidden, but not clever for the sake of being clever. He would have made it possible for Mabel to open. Without tools she could not lift. Duke rose when she did. He went to the rack again and sniffed along the bottom, then the left side, then the third hook from the end. His nose stopped under a label. So faded Mabel had to lean close. Boiler. Duke pressed his nose below it and sneezed. Mabel removed the old boiler key from its hook. Behind it was a tiny round hole in the wood, no wider than a pencil. Caleb stepped forward. Let me. Mabel turned her head. You already took one key from me today. He stopped as if the sentence had touched something raw. For a second he looked younger. A boy who had once sat on the motel office floor, eating crackers while Mabel folded invoices. But the look passed. Mabel opened the desk drawer and took out a letter opener, shaped like a little silver lantern. It had been part of the motel's first anniversary promotion. She slid its narrow tip into the hole and pressed. Nothing happened. Duke whined softly. Mabel shifted the angle, remembering Walter's stubborn love of left-handed latches. She pressed again, this time upward. A click sounded inside the rack. The lower board loosened. Mabel did not pull it. She waited, because old wood deserved patience. Duke put his nose against the bottom and nudged gently. The board swung forward on two small hinges, revealing a shallow metal box built into the wall behind it. The night safe. It was not large. Its gray paint had bubbled with age. A combination dial sat in the center, and above it, someone had taped a strip of motel stationery that had yellowed at the edges. In Walter's handwriting were 3 words. May knows 7, Marcy whispered. What does that mean? Caleb looked at Mabel as if he hated that she might know. Mabel's fingers went to the brass key in her pocket. Room 7. The first key Walter had given her. The room where stranded families slept during the ice storm, because it had the best heater. The room where she once let a mother with 2 children stay without paying, after her car slid into a ditch. 7 was not just a number. It was a memory Walter trusted her to keep. Mabel turned the dial slowly. 7 to the right, back to the year of the ice storm. Forward to the number of rooms filled that night. The exact pattern came to her not as arithmetic, but as a rhythm, like folding towels, like counting keys at midnight. On the last turn, the safe opened. Inside lay a red ledger, 3 envelopes tied with strings, and a small brass plaque wrapped in tissue. Caleb reached for the red ledger, but Duke stood, placed both front paws between Caleb and the open safe, and held there without a sound. Mabel lifted the ledger herself. The cover was worn at the corners. Across the front, in Walter's hand, were the words Winter Ledger, and beneath them smaller the sentence Caleb could not dismiss as sentiment. May ran the Blue Lantern when I could not. What can a red ledger prove when the people who want the motel sold have already decided gratitude is not a record? Mabel held the Winter Ledger with both hands, because the weight of it surprised her. It was not heavy like a safe or a suitcase. It was heavy like a thing that had waited too long to be believed. The red cover was rubbed pale along the spine. Dust clung to the corners. A thin line of Walter's old tobacco smell rose from the pages when she opened it, though he had given up smoking before Caleb was born. Duke stayed between Caleb and the open safe. Not threatening, not wild, only firm. His paws were planted on the worn laundry room tile. His gray muzzle pointed toward Caleb's hand, which had stopped in the air and then lowered slowly to his side. Marcy said, "Let her read it." Caleb looked at her. "She should read it first," Marcy said, softer this time. That small sentence did not repair what had been said that morning. But for Mabel, it changed the direction of the air in the room. She opened the ledger. The first page held dates from a winter storm that had closed the road for 4 days. Walter's handwriting filled the top line, but most of the page below it was hers. Room numbers, names, children, car trouble, medicine needed, paid later, no charge. Call sister in Ohio, extra blankets, husband diabetic, baby formula. Caleb shifted. This is a kindness record. I am not saying it is not nice. Mabel kept reading. Page after page carried more than kindness. It carried decisions. Heat bills marked with initials. Repair notes. Food bought for guests. Fuel ordered when Walter was sick. Deposits made after midnight. Names of local mechanics, pastors, nurses, and truckers who helped keep stranded families safe. Then Mabel found the first envelope. It had been tied into the ledger with cotton string, the kind used for motel laundry tags. Her name was written on the front, not Mabel. May. Inside were 6 signed slips from guests who had repaid rooms after the storm. Each slip said the same thing in different handwriting. Paid to May Whitaker at the Blue Lantern. Thank you for trusting us. Mabel touched one signature. She remembered the woman who had written it. Mrs. Alvarez, room 3. 2 boys in wet sneakers. a paper sack of oranges, and fear she tried to hide while counting coins at the counter. The second envelope held canceled checks. Not large checks. Not the kind that would make a lawyer sit straighter or a buyer withdraw an offer. Small checks. $78, $112, $45. But each was made out to the Blue Lantern Motel, and several had been endorsed by Mabel because Walter had been in the hospital that week. Caleb took one involuntary step closer. Mabel looked up. "Now you want to see?" His mouth opened, then closed. Marcy leaned over the table, careful not to touch. "Those are real bank marks." "They look like them," Mabel said. "We will need someone to confirm." Caleb seized the opening. "Exactly. They only look like something. Old checks, old slips, old notes. This does not stop a sale." Mabel nodded. "No. It stops you from calling me a burden before the truth is read." His face colored. The third envelope was thicker. Inside was a folded tax receipt, 2 repair invoices, and a letter from a bank manager whose name Mabel remembered because he had worn a green tie every day for 13 years. The letter was addressed to Walter and Mabel Whitaker, Blue Lantern Motel, and thanked them for bringing the account current after storm damage, illness, and delayed payments. Mabel read the sentence once silently, then aloud. "Your continued management, especially Mrs. Whitaker's night operations and collection work, made the recovery possible." No one spoke. Duke lowered his head, but did not leave his place. The words did not make Mabel rich. They did not hand her a court order. They did something quieter and harder to argue with. They put her labor back where it had been taken from her. Caleb reached for the letter, then stopped himself. "May I see it?" Mabel looked at his hand. For most of his life, Caleb had been the boy she handed things to. Crackers, room keys, quarters for the soda machine, a towel when he spilled juice in room 2. She had given him so many things without hesitation that he had grown into a man who thought her last things could be taken the same way. "You may read it here," she said. "You may not take it," he swallowed. "Fine." Marcy pulled out a chair for Mabel without speaking. Mabel sat because standing too long made her hip ache, and because dignity did not require. Pretending pain was not real. Duke finally stepped back from the safe and came to her side. She reached down and rubbed behind his ear. "You found what they wanted to open without me," she whispered. Duke pressed his head into her palm. Caleb bent over the letter. His eyes moved across the lines, then back to the top. "Walter never told me this. You were a child. My father never told me either. Your father did not ask." That was not said cruelly. It was said like a receipt pulled from a drawer. Plain, dated, undeniable. Marcy picked up the photograph of the plaque again. "Where is this plaque now?" Mabel looked at the tissue in the open safe. Duke noticed her looking. He moved before anyone else did, nosing gently at the wrapped brass bundle until it rolled toward the edge. Mabel caught it, unwrapped the paper, and laid the plaque on the table. Mabel Whitaker, night manager and co-keeper. The engraving had darkened with age, but every letter remained. Marcy covered her mouth. Caleb stared at the plaque longer than he had stared at the photo. A picture could be dismissed as a memory. A letter could be dismissed as love. A plaque was a thing removed from a wall, removed by someone, saved by Walter, hidden where only May would know to look. Mabel ran her finger over her name. The laundry room door opened suddenly. A man in a tan jacket stepped inside, with the brisk confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Behind him stood the buyer's representative, Mr. Lowell, holding a tablet and a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. Caleb turned sharply. "I told you to wait outside." Mr. Lowell glanced at the open safe, the ledger, the plaque, and Mabel's hand resting on Duke's collar. "I apologize," he said. The front door was unlocked. Duke stood again. Mr. Lowell's smile thinned. The ledger had given Mabel her name back inside the room. But now the man waiting to buy the Blue Lantern had seen the evidence before it could be copied. And his eyes went first not to the plaque, but to the open safe in the walls. What happens when the buyer sees the proof before the woman it belongs to has a chance to protect it? Mr. Lowell did not step fully into the laundry room. He only leaned past the doorway, tablet held against his chest, eyes moving in a quick inventory. Open wall, old safe, red ledger, brass plaques, elderly woman, dog to him, Mabel could see. Every person and object was already becoming a risk category. Caleb moved between him and the table. This is a family matter. Mr. Lowell's smile returned, thins, and practiced. Of course, I only came in because we were scheduled to review the property conditions. I did not realize there were additional materials. Additional materials, Mabel repeated. Mrs. Whitaker, I apologize. I meant historical items. Duke stood beside the table, his head level with the edge, his body angled so that no one could reach the ledger without coming through him or around Mabel. He had not barked. He had not snapped. He had simply understood that the room had changed from discovery to danger. Marcy reached for the tissue paper and began covering the plaque again. Her fingers trembled. Caleb noticed. Marcy? She did not look at him. We need copies now. Mr. Lowell lifted one hand before anything is copied. I should advise that old guest records may contain private information. It would be best if those were transferred to a secure disposal service. Mabel's hand closed on the red ledger. Duke gave one low sound. There it is, she said. Mr. Lowell blinked. Excuse me, the first thing you want is not to read it. You want it gone. I am concerned about liability. Were you concerned about liability before you came through my unlocked front door? Caleb turned toward her. Grandma, do not make this worse. Mabel looked at him for a long moment. Worse than being called a burden in my own laundry room? No one answered. Mr. Lowell cleared his throat. The sale packet includes standard language about abandoned records and outdated business materials. If the motel has old documents stored in unsafe conditions, that can complicate closing. Closing, Mabel said. Not truth, he smiled again, but the expression had work in it now. Truth is not my role. That may be the most honest thing said today. Marcy let out a small breath, almost a laugh, almost a sob. Caleb stared at her, confused by the fact that his wife was no longer standing neatly on his side. Mabel pulled the ledger closer. Her hip hurt, her fingers ached from old cold. Her chest felt tight from too many years arriving all at once. But she knew how to move when a guest tried to rush the desk. She had learned decades ago that panic made people louder, while steadiness made them listen. She pointed to Marcy's phone. Photograph every page with my name, every check, every letter and the plaque. Caleb said, we should wait. No, Mr. Lowell added. I would strongly suggest you consult appropriate counsel before circulating business records. That is good advice, Mabel said. So we will make copies and then ask someone qualified to review them. We will not destroy them because a buyer is uncomfortable. Marcy picked up her phone. I will take the pictures. Caleb's face tightened. Marcy? She is right, Marcy said quietly. We almost threw away the key. We were helping. We brought trash bags. The sentence landed with the soft force of a door closing. Mr. Lowell shifted his weight. Duke's eyes followed the movement. The buyer's representative looked at the dog, then at the open safe, and seemed to decide that politeness might not move the room fast enough. I will step outside, he said. But the buyer will need certainty before proceeding. Mabel nodded. Then the buyer can wait for certainty. When Mr. Lowell left, the laundry room did not relax. It only became honest about its tension. Marcy photographed the plaque first, then the letter from the bank manager, then the canceled checks. She worked carefully, angling the phone to avoid glare. Mabel watched every image appear on the screen before allowing the next page to turn. Caleb stood near the dryer, arms down now, no folder in his hands. He looked older than he had that morning. I did not know, he said finally. Mabel did not soften the answer. You did not ask. I knew Grandpa worked hard. He did. I knew Dad helped. He did some. Caleb looked at the ledger, but no one told me you ran it. Mabel slid one page toward him but kept her palm on the corner. People do not always hide a woman by lying. Sometimes they hide her by thanking her in private and naming someone else in public. Duke lowered his head onto Mabel's knees. For the first time since morning, Caleb looked at the dog not as an obstacle, but as someone who had understood the room before he had. Marcy finished the first set of photographs. We need another person. Someone outside the family, Ruth, Mabel said. She can confirm memory, Marcy said. But we need a record, too. Maybe an old bank branch, if it still exists, or tax copies, or a former employee. Mabel turned a page and found a list in Walter's handwriting at the back of the ledger. Names, phone numbers. 2 had been crossed out. 1 had an address, Ruth Bell. Daniel Price, mechanic. Ellen Shore, county clerk, retired. She touched the last name. Ellen checked the motel tax envelopes every March. She would know if Walter filed documents with my name. Caleb stared at the list. You remember all these people? I remember the people who came to my counter when they needed something. That is different from remembering where I put my glasses. The words were not bitter. They were exact. Duke suddenly lifted his head and turned toward the lobby. A faint scrape came from beyond the hallway. Not the door. Not the ice machine. A drawer. Mabel's eyes moved to the office. The sale folder, she said. Caleb frowned. Mr. Lowell is outside. But Duke was already walking, slow and silent, toward the lobby. Mabel followed as far as the doorway, one hand sliding along the wall. Caleb and Marcy came behind her. In the office, the folder of sale papers lay open on the desk. The top pages were still there, but the small inner envelope Caleb had said held the old register room key was gone. Duke stood at the front counter, nose lifted toward the slot, where returned keys were dropped after hours. Inside the slot, half hidden beneath 2 room tags, was a folded paper Mabel had not seen before. It was not from the sale packet. It was a photocopy of the old plaque, marked with a handwritten note in the margin. Remove before showing buyer. Who had written remove before showing buyer on a copy of the plaque? And why was that note hidden in the key return slot? Mabel did not pick up the paper at first. She stood in the office doorway with one hand on the frame, watching Duke hold his nose over the after-hours key slot, as if it had breathed out a warning. Caleb reached around her. Let me see that. Duke turned his head. Caleb stopped. Mabel looked at him, no more reaching. First, his hand dropped. Marcy came forward instead, slowly, palms open. May I? Mabel nodded. Lay it flat. Marcy took the folded paper from the slot and placed it on the counter beside the register. It was a photocopy, faint and slightly crooked, of the same brass plaque now sitting in the laundry room. Mabel Whitaker, night manager and co-keeper. Someone had circled Mabel's name in black pen. Beside it, in quick slanted writing, were the words, remove before showing buyer. Below that was another line, ask Steve if old woman still has access. Mabel read the line twice. Old woman, not grandma, not Mrs. Whitaker, not Mabel, old woman. The words did not shout. That was what made them hurt. They were planning words, written after a person had already been turned into an obstacle. Caleb's face went pale. Marcy looked at him. See, I did not write that. I did not ask if you wrote it, I said. I did not. Mabel watched him carefully. Did someone ask you if I still had access? Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it. Duke gave a soft huff through his nose. That is not a no, Mabel said. Caleb rubbed both hands over his face. Lowell asked whether you still used the back rooms. I told him you lived here. I told him you had keys. And after that, he asked if there were old signs or records that might confuse the history of management. I thought he meant outdated branding. I did not know about the plaque. Marcia's eyes filled, but her voice stayed controlled. You knew enough to take the register room key. Caleb looked at the floor. Mabel picked up the photocopy with 2 fingers, the way she used to handle a damp receipt before it tore. This does not prove who removed the plaque. No, Marcy said. But it proves someone knew it existed and wanted it gone before the buyer saw it, Mabel said. The front door opened. Mr. Lowell stepped in from the rain, brushing water from his sleeves. He saw the paper in Mabel's hand. His polite smile did not arrive this time. Caleb turned on him. Did you go through my folder? Mr. Lowell looked from Caleb to Mabel. I checked whether the documents were ready. You took the inner envelope. I moved nothing of value. Duke stepped forward. His nails clicked once on the lobby tile. Mabel lifted the photocopy. Who wrote this? Mr. Lowell's face became very still. I do not recognize that document. Then you will not mind if we keep it. I would prefer to review where it came from. I am sure you would. Caleb looked at him. Did you know her name was on that plaque? Mr. Lowell adjusted his grip on the tablet. Old interior signage can complicate buyer perception. Buyer perception, Mabel said, not records, not history, perception. The buyer is purchasing a property, not a family dispute. Mabel folded the photocopy once and placed it inside the notebook. Then the buyer can wait until the family dispute is no longer being hidden inside the walls. Mr. Lowell's jaw tightened. Mrs. Whitaker, I am not your adversary. No, you are a man who came for a clean property and found a woman's name under the dust. The sentence sat in the office like the old bell over the door, ringing after everyone had stopped moving. Marcy took her phone. I am sending the photos to myself, to Caleb and to Ruth. Do not send private guest records, Mr. Lowell said quickly. I am sending the plaque, Walter's note, the bank letter, and the photocopy, Marcy answered. No guest names. Mabel glanced at her. That was careful. The records had meaning, but the people inside them still deserved privacy. Caleb looked at Mr. Lowell. The sale is paused. Mr. Lowell's expression sharpened. You do not have authority to pause unilaterally. Caleb looked at Mabel. For the first time that day, he asked instead of declared. Grandma? She held his gaze. The word grandma did not erase old woman or burden, but it was a door opening in the right direction. The sale is paused, Mabel said. The documents will be reviewed. The old records will be copied properly. Ruth will give a written statement if she chooses, and I will call Ellen Shore. Mr. Lowell said, this may affect the offer. Mabel almost smiled. Good, it should. He left with no farewell, after the door closed. Caleb sat on the old stool behind the desk. I thought I was saving you from this place, he said. Mabel touched the counter. This place has been saving parts of me that none of you remembered. Marcy wiped her eyes with her sleeve. I am sorry about the trash bags. Mabel nodded once. She was not ready to forgive everything, and the story did not need her to be. Duke moved behind the desk and lowered himself under the place where the plaque had once hung in the photograph. His body fit there, as if he had chosen the missing name for a bed. Mabel called Ruth back first. Then, with Marcy holding the phone and Caleb writing down every word, she called Ellen Shore, the retired clerk whose name Walter had left in the ledger. Ellen did not remember quickly. At first, her voice wandered through weather and hearing aids. Mabel waited. Old women deserved time to reach the shelf where memory lived. Then Mabel said Blue Lantern Motel. Winter tax envelopes. Walter in May. Ellen went silent. Oh, she said at last. He did file something with both names. Not ownership, honey. I cannot say that. But management responsibility. Emergency operating contact. I remember because he made me correct it when the first copy left you off. Caleb stopped writing. Mabel closed her eyes. Ellen continued. I may still have my old index notes in storage. I cannot promise. But the county office can confirm whether a copy was filed if you request it properly. Thank you, Mabel said. No, Ellen answered. I should have said something years ago. When the call ended, the office had changed again. Not solved, not finished. Changed. The proof had become a path. Ruth S. statement, Ellen S. index notes. The bank letter, the winter ledger, the photocopy someone wanted removed. Duke slept under the empty space on the wall, and above him, in the faded rectangle, where the brass plaque had once hung, Mabel could see exactly where her name had been taken down. What does quiet justice look like? When the truth does not hand an old woman a fortune, but gives her back the right to be named? By late afternoon, the rain had thinned to a silver mist over the gravel lot. The Blue Lantern sign flickered in the window. Not strong, not new, but still lit. Mabel sat behind the front counter, with the winter ledger open before her, and Duke asleep beneath the empty rectangle on the wall, where the plaque had once hung. No one had signed the sale papers. That was not a victory large enough for people who wanted shouting, arrests, or a family brought to its knees. Mabel had lived long enough to distrust victories that arrived too loudly. What happened instead was slower, smaller, and more honest. Caleb called the buyer's office and said the sale would not proceed until the family reviewed the motel records. Mr. Lowell argued in polished sentences. Caleb listened, looked once at Mabel, and repeated, "The sale is paused." Marcy carried the trash bags back to her sov without filling them. Then she returned with folders, sleeves, and sticky notes from the desk drawer. "I will label only what you tell me to label," she said. Mabel studied her face. "Start with copies. Originals stay here tonight." Marcy nodded. "Originals stay with you." Those words did not fix the morning either, but Mabel noticed them. An old woman notices when people begin speaking to her, instead of around her. Ruth Bell sent a photograph of herself, holding a Christmas card from the Blue Lanterns, then left a voice message describing the ice storm, the soup pot, the unpaid rooms, and the way Mabel had kept the night desk running while Walter was sick. Ellen Shore promised to check with the county office about the emergency operating contact record. She made no legal claims. She confirmed that Mabel had not invented the filings, and that Walter had once insisted her name be put back where it belonged. The bank letter would need review. The checks would need careful handling. The guest records would need privacy. The sale papers would need someone qualified to read them. Nothing magical had happened inside the laundry room walls. But Caleb could no longer call the nightbook clutter. Marcy could no longer call the old key rack unsafe, junk. Mr. Lowell could no longer pretend the motel had arrived clean and empty, without a woman's labor built into its walls. And Caleb could no longer say burden without hearing the scrape of that hidden safe opening behind him. As evening came, Mabel made soup from what she had. Canned tomatoes, broth, elbow macaroni, and the last half of an onion. She fed Duke first, because she always did. His bowl sat near the office door, and he ate with the deep concentration of a dog who had worked a full day. Mabel took her medicine with water from the paper cup by the sink. She locked the front door. She wrote each call and each document in a notebook, because proof deserved order. Caleb watched from the counter, quiet. "I forgot you did all this," he said. Mabel stirred the soup. "You did not forget. You were never taught to see it." He lowered his head. "That may be worse, it is." He accepted that. For once, he did not explain it away. After supper, he brought a screwdriver from his truck. Not to remove anything, to rehang the plaque. Mabel stopped him before he touched the wall. "Not there." He turned. "You do not want it back?" "I do, but not hidden behind the desk, where only workers can see it." She walked slowly to the lobby. Duke rose at once and followed. The front wall held framed photographs of the motel through the years. Walter shaking hands with a mayor. Caleb's father beside a repainted sign. A grand opening photo where Mabel appeared at the edge, half covered by flowers. Mabel touched that frame. There. Marcy removed the photograph. Behind it, the wallpaper was brighter. Caleb held the brass plaque in both hands. He did not rush. He did not make a speech. He fixed it beneath the old motel photograph, where guests' family, buyers, and grandchildren would have to see it. Mabel Whitaker, night manager and co-keeper. The screws turned into the wall with small final sounds. Mabel stood before her name. No one clapped. No one fell to their knees. No one became good all at once. Caleb still had debts to discuss. The roof still needed work. The sale might happen someday, or it might not. But if it happened, Mabel would read every page. Her records would be copied. Her name would remain part of the story. And no one would move her out with trash bags and kind voices. Duke sat below the plaque. Then, as if his duty had finally changed shape, he lay down with his head on Mabel's shoe and closed his eyes. Caleb's voice broke when he said, "I am sorry I called you a burden." Mabel looked at him for a long time. "You did not say it to my face. I said it where you could hear." "Yes, I am sorry." She looked down at Duke, at the old dog, who had guarded a key rack, a nightbook, a safe, and a name. "Do not apologize only because you were caught. Learn what you nearly threw away." Caleb nodded. Marcy placed the nightbook in a plastic sleeve and set it in the top drawer. Not hidden, not displayed like a trophy. Just protected. The red ledger went beside it. The photocopy with remove before showing buyer went into a separate folder marked for review. Mabel wrote the label herself. Her handwriting was slower than it used to be, but every letter was clear. Near midnight, after Caleb and Marcy left, Mabel walked through the Blue Lantern with Duke at her side. Room 7 was empty. The heater clicked twice before it warmed, just as it always had. She stood in the doorway and remembered a mother with 2 children, wet sneakers by the bed, oranges on the dresser, and Walter whispering that they could not afford to be so generous. "We cannot afford not to be," Mabel had told him then. Now, decades later, the motel held that sentence like a receipt. Back in the lobby, she turned off the lamp behind the counter, but left the small light above the plaque on. It made the brass glow softly against the old walls. Mabel did not know whether the Blue Lantern would survive another year. She did not know whether Caleb would become the man his apology wanted him to be. She did not know how many records the county would confirm. But she knew this. The truth had not made her young, and it had not made life easy. It had done something better. It had stopped the room from treating her chair as empty. Duke slept under her name until morning, no longer guarding the wall from people who wanted to erase it, but resting beneath the proof that they had failed.